Well, welcome back to RAD, where we're flashing back to the 90s, an era where everything was pretty rad. But you know what's not rad? The one universal thing that everyone dreads to hear. We need to talk. It's the universal sign that things are about to get real, real fast. Whether you're hearing it from a parent, a friend, a teacher, boyfriend, or girlfriend, it usually means that there is a conflict that needs to be resolved. And if you were growing up in the 90s, there is one source that you could always trust to help you learn how to resolve conflict, which is usually the reason behind the "we need to talk." And that was television. Saved by the Bell specifically. This show is about a group of high school friends, and conflict always gets resolved in about 30 minutes or less. In one episode, friends Zach and Slater were interested in the same girl at the same time. So what did these two friends do? They tried to sabotage each other's chances with her, obviously. So let's see what happened after a few of those sabotage attempts.
Hey, Zach. Yo. Last night at the movies, you went too far.
Just helped a mother get together with her son. What's so wrong about that?
Wrecking my date with Joanna wasn't funny.
Oh, like it was funny wrecking my study date the night before?
Hey, you started it, man, making me look like a jerk at the max.
Well, that's what you are.
What did you say?
You heard me. Get out of my face.
And what if I don't, punk?
Then I'll just have to make you, punk.
Well, maybe you've never been in a fight with your friend in the hallway over a crush, or maybe you have. But we all know what it's like to fight and have conflict with others. So how do these situations normally get resolved? Well, hopefully peacefully, but how do we get to that point? How do we make peace out of the conflict? And what exactly does peace even mean, and how would you define it? Having peace about something is amazing, but we sometimes don't always appreciate it or even realize it until we don't have it anymore. Believe it or not, I actually had a pretty similar situation to Zach and Slater. It didn't end in a fist fight, but it did end up in a relationship being estranged. There was a person that I went to high school with, and our older siblings went to high school together too. We were as close as could be. But due to some pretty major factors that would take entirely too long to hash out in this message, we got into a major verbal fight. I mean, parents had to get involved, and it quickly ended a relationship that was in place for about 8 years. And at that moment, I seriously did not care if I ever spoke to this person again. But did I have peace with the situation? We'll get back to that later in the story today. But today we're going to talk about having fights and making peace because, as we'll see, God has something pretty awesome to say about this. And it's pretty radical. We mentioned last week that there was a lot of people who thought that Jesus was too radical. In the 90s, rad meant cool, but its actual meaning has to do with being different, revolutionary, and countercultural. What Jesus said about loving God and others was radical, and what he teaches us about peace is pretty radical too. We're sticking in the book of James, Jesus' brother, so let's see what James has to say about peace and about fighting. For where you have an envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder in every evil practice. Well, James got pretty straight to the point here. So why do we fight with each other? Because we're selfish. And he's right? We fight because sometimes we're greedy. We want what we want, and when we don't get it, we try to take it from others or punish them for not giving us what we wanted. Sometimes we're self-centered. Maybe we didn't mean to be selfish, but we didn't really think about how we said or what we did may have impacted someone else. We're busy thinking about ourselves. Sometimes we're just defensive. When we're hurt, stressed out, insecure, or feeling like things are out of our control, we often resort to selfishness, trying to protect ourselves. We tend to lash out at others when we feel threatened. And we may not intend to be hurtful, but when we're hurting, we often hurt others. For all humans, selfishness is a reflex, but it doesn't actually accomplish what we think it's going to. Selfishness doesn't keep us or get us what we really need or even make our lives better. Instead, selfishness leads to fighting, damaged relationships with others, and with God. But what's the alternative to selfishness and conflict? Let's see what James has to say in the next few verses. But the wisdom that comes from heavens is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap the harvest of righteousness. James calls us to be peacemakers. And that's an interesting word if you think about it. It tells us that peace isn't something that happens accidentally. It needs to be made or created. And it implies that it's normal to see fighting and conflict, but you can't be a peacemaker when things are already peaceful. But it doesn't imply that all conflict is bad or should be avoided. James didn't tell us to be peacekeepers who silence or avoid anything disruptive or uncomfortable. Making peace is not the same thing as keeping the peace. And James also helps us see how we might become peacemakers with the wisdom that comes from heaven. What? Does that mean that God is just going to drop a little manual from the sky? No, it means that God is going to teach us how to be peacemakers. But how is he going to do that? First of all, through the Holy Spirit who guides and empowers us. Secondly, through the words and examples of Jesus, who is God in the flesh. When Jesus was on earth, he said a lot of radical things, but one of the most radical is what we would call the Sermon on the Mount. Literally, a sermon he preached while standing on a mountain. In this sermon, Jesus took the world's understanding of who God was pleased with and completely flipped it upside down. Jesus often said things like, "You've heard this, but say that." And this is flipping the conventional wisdom that gave people a new and better way to understanding and loving God and loving others. So think back to that clip about Slater and Zach, or the first fight that you had at home, or maybe the first fight that you're having with a friend right now. You might think that winning that fight is the mark of success. You might think that compromising is admitting defeat. But listen to what Jesus said. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Jesus is telling us to be the people who fight for peace, instead of fighting for our own self-interest. And when we do, he says that we will be blessed and called God's children. And this is the opposite of our human nature. We usually want what's best for us. We don't want to compromise. It's the opposite of the world's understanding, too. We often celebrate strength and dominance and winning at all cost, but Jesus shows us a different way. He didn't just talk about it, though. He lived it. When Jesus came to earth, his goal was to make peace between us and God. And he didn't do it by fighting with us. He did it by laying down his own life on our behalf. Can you imagine how your family, your friends, school, or the world could even be if we decided to fight for peace instead of each other or fighting against each other? If we loved others more like Jesus loves us, the change could be radical. So, do you want to see that radical change? Are you not sure what you think about Jesus yet, but you know you want to see more good and less hate in the world? Then James tells us how. Radical people fight for peace. And it's not always easy to find your way out of a fight, but peace is possible, even when it doesn't seem very likely. So remember that story that I mentioned at the beginning? Well, here's the rest of it. I spent a while fuming, not gonna lie, thinking about all the reasons why I did not like this person and how I for sure thought that I was right in this situation. But as I took a step back and time kind of passed and actually tried to see if that was adding to this destroyed friendship, I realized that it didn't need to be a destroyed one. It probably wouldn't get exactly back to where it was before, and that was okay. We don't need to be on the level that we were prior to the fight. And I was at peace with that. I knew that I needed to reach out to them and just kind of clear the air. We both admitted that we said some pretty horrible stuff, and we were both in the wrong, and we handled it pretty poorly. We still keep in touch every now and then, and we aren't close, but we're peaceful. The only regret that I have from that moment is waiting about 2 years to reach out to this person. I could have spent a lot of time in a much better headspace if I had done that. And not every situation will end this way, because in a conflict, you can never completely control the outcome, but you can always contribute to making peace in a small way. So here are some ideas to help you get started. Stop the drama. Just don't start it. We all start drama more than we care to admit, and our words, looks, actions, or inaction are all capable of hurting others and creating conflict. What's a small thing that you can do this week to be a drama stopper instead of a drama starter? Secondly, build a bridge. Don't burn it. When we're hurt or angry, we often want to snap back, take revenge, or end a relationship. When a relationship is unhealthy or abusive, walking away is probably the best thing that you can do. But most of the time, it's more radical and Jesus-like response is to reach out instead of pushing people away. Do you have a damaged relationship that you could be repaired by rebuilding a bridge that you once burned? Third, fight for others and not just yourself. Being a peacemaker isn't always about righting wrongs in your relationship. Sometimes it's about righting wrongs in the world. We can be peacemakers by fighting for others who need help or support, or a friend, or even an advocate. Who's someone or something bigger than yourself that you could fight for? Next, make peace with God, not just with others. For the last few weeks, we spent a lot of time talking about how Jesus teaches us to love others, but don't forget about Jesus' most important goal, to make a way for us to have peace with God. Through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, you and I have the opportunity to be close with God, even after the sin had separated us. And it's easy to fight for ourselves. It is much more radical to do the difficult thing and fight for peace. But this week, I hope you do. As we wrap up this series, I want to leave you with one last challenge. When you leave here today, do something radical. Decide to love God and others better this week by listening more, by not playing favorites, watching your words, fighting for peace. And about 2,000 years ago, the world was changed forever when Jesus showed us how to love like this. Now God's inviting us to continue to change the world by loving others with the radical love of Jesus. So will you?